Did the odds of a NIO stock short squeeze just go up? Maybe. But hang in there because there are some indicators, some dots that I'd like to try and connect, and you'll have to sit tight while I go through some of this. First things first, it's Wednesday, November 6th. This is the late afternoon as I'm recording this. There's your date and timestamp. And there are a couple of things I want to point out. The first thing is unconventional. That's probably the best word to describe me. And so some of my views, the things I use for indicators, or the dots that I even use to connect things, they are, just like me, in my view, unconventional. Now with that, I want to go to the second thing, and that is a clip, a very brief clip from me on Monday in the video that I released in case you didn't see it. Or it's going to be landslide for Trump. The reason I say the landslide for Trump, now there were two indicators that I gave that sort of were my reasoning or my thinking with why it could be a landslide for Trump. And the two indicators were TikTok and YouTube. Did I mention I'm unconventional? All right, now let's keep moving because this is where things are about to get really interesting and I think fun. For those who might not know about this, let's go back in time. This is April 18th when this came out. Trump Media tells shareholders how to block their DJT stock being loaned to short sellers. The date again, April 18th. April 19th. Citadel Securities blasts Trump Media CEO Devin Nunes over DJT short selling letter the very next day. How interesting, but it's not over yet. How about June 5th? This is all in 2024, by the way. Trump Media wants probe into stock manipulation, blames naked short sellers for losses. Now this is DJT, and these are some of the firms that are shorting the stock. And wouldn't you know, one of the companies that's shorting the stock is Citadel Advisors. Now, I've mentioned Citadel as a suspicious short in NIO for several years. And in fact, it was several years ago when I brought them up and said, hey, heads up, they've got a short position in NIO. This is something to keep an eye on. The stock price for NIO was over $40 at that time, and it has just been brought down. But we'll look at the fails to deliver, which could represent the naked shorting in just a second, because first, I wanted to make sure you also recognize that Citadel is also a short in NIO. Now, this is the DJT fail to deliver and recent stock chart. The yellow represents the stock price. The white represent fails to deliver. That's when there could have been naked shorting going on. And let's choose this day right here. This is the peak of the fails to deliver. Now, the problem with fails to deliver is they're never real-time data. They're always lagged and delayed. So we don't actually know when these were failing. They could be cumulatively growing over time, but this is the day they're reported, okay? Now on this day, which is June 20th, 2024, there were almost 4.5 million shares that couldn't be located. And yet on that same day, there weren't even 14 million shares traded of the stock. Talk about suspicious, right? But that's not all. One of the things that I'm keeping an eye on is if there is a lag time of about 2 months, give or take a little bit of time perhaps, from the spikes and what the stock price looks like. Let's just use this really short term with DJT. And the problem with DJT is it hasn't been on the market that long, so we don't have more data, but I'll kind of keep an eye on it moving forward. Here's the thing. June 20th, if we go out 2 months from that spike, then we're right about here. And this is a low at that time. And then of course, within the next couple of months, you see more fails to deliver popping up at, perhaps coincidentally, perhaps very intentionally, the stock price went down to its low point, at least in the near term. So look, these are just things that I watch. Again, unconventional view, and I just try to use different things as dots or indicators. Now let's talk about NIO. And this is the recent NIO chart. A couple of things to point out here. The fails to deliver had two spikes that caught my attention here in this year of 2024. This one with over 6 million shares that couldn't be located on a single day. And that's the same week they had other elevated levels. Then this other day this was in March. I think this one was in July. But this one in March was over 5 million shares that couldn't be located. Here's why that caught my attention. In the history of NIO stock, we do have a little more history to look at. We had not seen such elevated levels within the last 4 years, basically. You'd have to go back to the early part of 2020 or the latter part of 2019 to get those spikes. But as we look at the full history of NIO stock, one of the things that I think is very obvious is you have an obvious absence of the fails to deliver during the time frame where the stock price rocketed and was much, much higher. And then since my sort of announcement about the suspicious short that is Citadel getting involved in NIO as a short several years ago, we've seen this decline of the stock price with the obvious uptrend on the side of the fails to deliver, which could depict naked shorting. Now, this last piece is maybe the most interesting, especially for anyone who's looking at Chinese stocks and maybe wondering what's going on there. This is Alibaba, and it's not as common for a very profitable company to get naked shorted or to have FTDs, which could represent naked shorting going on. But Alibaba, as a very profitable company, look at this. If we go back throughout the history, and this is as far back as we can go, we don't have data before 2014. But if you'll notice how much higher the stock went during this absence of the fails to deliver. And interestingly enough, that was also about 4 years ago. I'm just really curious how this all plays out and what happens if, let's say, for example, the new Trump administration decides to actually get serious and go after some of these, potentially bad actors in Wall Street, some of the folks. And I don't know how Citadel could not be on the radar of Trump, especially with respect to the Trump media and the back and forth between Citadel and that company. So I want to hear from other people, but this was very interesting for me to kind of, dig into a little bit and look at. And I don't know, I want to hear from other people. Again, this is me unconventional, sharing some of my thoughts and some of the indicators or dots that may or may not be connected. Maybe they do connect, maybe they don't, but I'm always interested and curious to hear from other people. So drop it in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Did this change of administration or the incoming change of administration, does this set up a better chance for stocks like NIO to squeeze the shorts? I want to hear from you. Thanks. Have a great day. I'll see y'all again very soon.